Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. And we are facing a grim perspective. It is now the dark time. Certainly civilization as we've known it is threatened as seldom in the recent past or even looking further back. But at the same time, we are going to carry out our policy of the pessimism of the intelligence, if you will, the pessimism of the intelligence, but the optimism of the will. So there's plenty of work to be done. And we are now at a time where programmatic ideas are absolutely needed. They should be in the ascendancy. And this is the stock and trade of anybody serious. So I would suggest you think about the program of the Tax Wall Street Party. Now, obviously, I've just been watching the hearings in the House of Representatives. We have just had the Senate in the so-called vote-a-rama in the night between Wednesday and Thursday. They snuck it in as a deed done in the dead of night. And that's originally the crime of 1873, the Specie Resumption Act and the Coin Act. But we're now at that same level of enormity. The procedure, the budget resolution, calling for the beginning of the gutting of Obamacare through budget reconciliation, 51 votes, or a simple majority. That is now coming to us from the Senate. And we've also got now, right now, as we speak here on Friday afternoon, Friday the 13th, people, Friday the 13th. I don't believe in that stuff, but some do. And if this is certainly going to add to superstitious thinking, right? The so-called Aberglaube, that's going to be stoked by this happening on Friday the 13th. The House of Representatives, in its infinite folly, is going to pass that same Senate-generated budget resolution. And this will not, for the moment, destroy Obamacare. It will not dismantle really anything, but it is a kind of a commitment, an instruction to the committees of the House and the Senate, and a notice to the world that they are going to persist on this destructive course, right? This violation of the Constitution. What does it violate? It violates the General Welfare Clause, the heart and soul of the preamble. The General Welfare Clause is being violated. It's being trampled on because the goal of these Republicans is to fulfill their decades-long, right, going back to 1965, ambition to wreck the Medicare and other things. But they're starting with Obamacare. Some of it goes back to 1935, the Social Security Act. Some of it goes back to 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson's Medicare and similar legislation, Medicaid, 1968, I think. We are now at the beginning of a process which may roll all of this back. It may all be privatized. And I don't know the answer to that. All I can say is struggle, mobilize, get active, right? Get active or get radioactive. But certainly, if you don't do something now, you're going to be left with nothing but your eyes to cry with. And this is, of course, a monument to the tragic market of dupes that has taken place over the last couple of years, that the beneficiaries of these programs, the ones whose lives depend on them, perhaps more than any others, those people have been successfully induced to support these self-destructive measures. So we've now got the Senate having voted for this budget resolution And, of course, we're going to see the House within minutes. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday the 13th. A terrible time. The darkness is falling. The abyss gapes and yawns. And we're going to see the lower house now follow the upper house in voting to gut the funding. They apparently will not be able to take away some of the provisions. For example, the idea that insurance companies are not allowed to practice this exclusion of pre-existing conditions. I don't think they can reach that, but they will. And what they will do is make it financially impossible and probably drive most of the insurance companies out of that market. Now, there's much to say, and we'll try to say as much of it as we can. Let me just say to our listeners, right, since each one of you is a valuable person, and each one of you has an inherent right to survive, right, to flourish, but certainly to survive. If you don't have health insurance right now, this is the time. I don't know the details. I don't know when the enrollment periods are. I don't know any of that stuff. But if I were you, I would go hell for leather and try to get some equity, try to get a piece of Obamacare before it's gone. In other words, what may come out of this is some kind of a compromise. I don't know. I'm hoping that at least people who are now in it will be allowed to stay in it. And that would suggest that it's imperative to get in it so that you won't be completely out in the cold. I have no idea. We are now in uncharted territory. Anarchy, the abyss, chaos, of course, in the healthcare system, a probable recession, hundreds of billions of dollars of losses, to say nothing of mortality and morbidity. That means, as Bernie Sanders put it, thousands of lives will be lost. How many thousands? I don't want to find out. I don't want to know. And this will not be a quibble about whether it's 20 million who are being stripped of their health care or 30 million. It's essentially the 30 million is accurate in the sense that it includes projected enrollments in the near future, right, in the sort of the relevant historical horizon. But if you don't have any health care, you better get some. Get yourself the bronze plan. Get yourself something cheap with a high deductible or whatever you can get. Get something so that you'll have something in your hand to negotiate with or to make a claim, stake a claim, get some damages or restitution or something. I would really do that because the most likely outcome, we're going to go through this in quite a bit of detail, but the most likely outcome is some of the Democratic speakers this morning and this afternoon in the House have said, the promise was repeal and replace. Well, there is no replace, and there can't be, given the ideology of a tribe of extreme ideologues, i.e. the Republican Party. There cannot be a replacement. If you're going to have the obligation of hospitals to treat people with no insurance who come to emergency rooms, if you're going to have the obligation, and by the way, watch that one, because it used to be the case that they would let you die while they checked your credit, and that would run counter to one of the specific promises made by the president-elect. But then there's also the question of the pre-existing conditions. Republican ideology prevents any effective answer to those, and we'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., and we are following the tragic unfolding of events in the House of Representatives, the vote to advance the budget resolution, the crime of 2017, I guess we'll have to call it, the stab in the back of the American people, the poor, masses who have been so misled and manipulated as to get us to this situation. But there it is, and this is now coming down on them, and the ones who need it most are the ones who are essentially doing it to themselves. But even so, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They really don't. That's the point. And that is not disrespectful. That's just the way it is. So we are looking at this. It's just a matter of a couple of minutes at the present time. And again, if you don't have some health insurance, right, if you've been putting off showing up for some Obamacare, get yourself a piece of Obamacare right now, because that may be all the edge you're going to have, and you better get it and make sure then you have some claim to something at some future point. And, whatever the deductible is, go for it. Now, therefore, again, what we're voting on is a budget resolution. So this is going to be used in this process of budget reconciliation. This does not yet destroy anything. So you've got a little time, but not a lot. You've got maybe weeks. I don't know. We heard promises earlier this week coming from the incoming chief executive that it would all be done simultaneously, that it would happen on the same day. That is to say, the repeal and the replace. This is not what's happening. The opposite. It's being repeal now, and replace is put off until what you used to call the Greek kalends. In other words, until never, until the 12th of never. And that's what some of these Democrats have been saying, that it's really repeal and repent, or repeal and run. That is to say that the Republicans are going to repeal this, and given the ideology of the Republican Party, there will never be a replacement. Never. That can be the intention of some of these people. The smiling Ryan, who poses as a humanitarian, for example, in his town hall on CNN, may indeed be thinking in precisely those terms. Certainly some Republicans are. Replace and run. Abandon this entire thing. You've probably heard this argument from the Republicans that Obamacare is collapsing anyway. That is scare propaganda. That is a complete exaggeration. Obamacare can go along for quite a while. And remember, the increases in the premiums and the increases in the deductibles are being done by whom? By Obama? No, not by Obama, but by private insurance companies. And the Republican propaganda attempts to hide this important fact. Whatever's being done to the American people is being done by private insurance companies. Now, of course, it was always very unwise to give those private insurance companies this kind of power. And this is in some ways the original sin of Obama, that he allowed this to happen, that he did not fight for Medicare for all. That is the solution. We're not really fighting here for the perpetuation of Obamacare, although as of right now, we want to keep Obamacare unless and until this can be paired. If you're going to repeal Obamacare, part of that same bill has to simply be that 1 or 2 line provision that says the Medicare Act of 1965 is hereby amended to allow anybody, any person in the U.S. jurisdiction, not even citizen, I don't care about that, because once the epidemics start, everybody has to be covered. And if there's somebody on your block who's not covered, that's a threat to your life. So you want them covered, believe me. It's just practicality. It's also morality, Christianity, whatever you want to say. But they better get coverage. So that approach would be the one. So you build that right in. Obamacare is sunsetted, okay, but only if you've got Medicare for all built into the same bill. What would Medicare for All cost? Well, between $100 and $150 per person per month. Subsidies have to be provided for the unemployed, the destitute, and others. Who should pay? Who should pay? Well, Wall Street has to pay. The Wall Street sales tax, the 1% tax on all Wall Street turnover. And when people come forward, I've heard the Republicans today with this pessimistic, nihilistic propaganda of the Republicans. The nihilists are out there saying, well, Medicare will be bankrupt soon. Social Security will be bankrupt soon. Yeah, unless you provide other revenue, which would be make Goldman Sachs pay for their fair share. In other words, make them pay something like 35% U.S. federal corporate income tax, which they don't pay. Remember, GE is, as a hedge fund, is getting a negative tax rate many years. In other words, the government pays them to be there. And Goldman Sachs, it's just a few percentage points. Nothing like this 35% we're hearing about. And, of course, the Mickeys, the poor dupes, the gulls, the simpletons who say, oh, well, 35% is too high. Yeah, they don't pay that. But not the big firms. The big firms don't pay that. The big firms use loopholes to pay a whole lot less. So what we need, therefore, is a viable national system, Medicare for all, and that has to be financed by a 1% Wall Street sales tax on all transactions, on derivatives, on stocks, on bonds, any other kind of significant financial paper, financial instruments, 1% on the notional value. And if you do that, you're going to get tens of billions of dollars per year, and you can then channel half of that to the states for the basic police powers, right? The police, the fire department, the teachers, the DMV, and all of that, and half to the federal government for the stuff that we're talking about here, although the money going to the states can also be used for the state Medicaid variants, okay? So that's a solution. A couple of more comments on the Obamacare debate when we get back. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. We're coming up to Martin Luther King Day early next week. That is to say, specifically, actually Sunday already. Martin Luther King Day. Congratulations to all civil rights activists, people who care about civil rights, human rights, and we do. So we are devoted to the Martin Luther King holiday, and those who don't mark it and celebrate it, they had better search their consciences. And remember what Martin Luther King stood for was unity of movements. He said, we're going to take anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War movement, at that time significantly white, but not only. We're going to take the civil rights movement, black and white, together, and the labor movement. And you'll remember the last thing that Martin Luther King was doing was going to Memphis, Tennessee, and supporting the strike of the garbage men of Memphis, Tennessee. That is how it was in the course of that he fell as a soldier in the battle for human freedom. And so therefore, anti-war, civil rights, labor, and that was the combination that could have carried the day. That would have been essentially put that together with the Robert Kennedy candidacy and a couple of other things, and we could have had a new world. And it was that which both of them, right, both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were eliminated in order to get us on the path that has led to the current situation. Anyway, my commitment, my fundamental, unshakable worldview, well, at least until proven otherwise, which it has not been, and it's actually been confirmed again and again and again, is that this is New Deal America. This is New Deal America, and that the fundamental outlook of the American people is agreeable to Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Economic Bill of Rights of 1944. January 1944, State of the Union address sent to Congress, which includes a series of 8 specific rights, which we'll get to in just a minute. I'd like to repeat them. The second Bill of Rights, or Economic Bill of Rights. As Roosevelt said, needy people cannot be free. They cannot be free. It's going to take economic backup to make the formal political rights into something with real content. But at this point, let's just we'll delay that until later in the show. But here's the idea. A poll, right, to prove my thesis that this is New Deal America. This is not von Hayek America. This is not Howard Zinn America either. It's not the Austrian school. It's not this anti-American left liberal thing that has been going on. But we have a poll which essentially says that if you ask people, and this is National Public Radio, we actually have 2 polls. One of them is National Public Radio Ipsos poll. How many people say just repeal Obamacare? And again, this is what the Republicans are doing. This is Ryan. This is that guy McCarthy. This is Price. The Republicans of the House, one of the most extreme political groups in the world. You know, years ago we used to say only the Tory backbenchers and the permanent members of the Supreme Soviet in Moscow. So London Tories, backbench, and Supreme Soviet in Moscow. Those were the only comparisons to the Republicans there in the House with their gerrymandered permanent seats. Okay, NPR Ipsos poll. You ask Americans, how many of you want Obamacare repealed and not replaced? 14%. And it shows a lot of people don't know what Obamacare means, ACA, and so forth. And here's another one. Let's see if we can give you the specs on this one. A second poll, how many people want the full repeal of Obamacare? And I'm reading now from The Hill. The first was NPR, and now we've got The Hill. So how many of you want to have Obamacare repealed and replaced with nothing? This other one says 18%. 18%. So one says 14% want to get rid of it completely, and 18% according to another one. So what's the average? 16% of the American people don't like Obamacare. So when you hear these Republican demagogues on the floor of the House saying this is an unpopular law, Americans hate it, well, 16% share that view. And actually, I have to say, parenthetically, this debate with the Democrats constantly coming forward with all kinds of people, individual, man in the street, real people, comments saying, my husband is sick, we don't know what to do. If we don't have insurance, one or both of us is going to die, and on and on. The Republican Party is taking a colossal risk. It used to be said that Social Security was the third rail of American politics, right, since 1935. This is what George W. Bush, right, the younger Bush the younger, Bush the fils, not père, but fils. He tried to privatize Social Security in 2005, 2006, and was defeated. It's the third rail. Now, maybe Obamacare is developing into third rail capabilities, but I'm really wondering if the Republicans really insist on this, what will be the blowback? Because they can use these sophistic formulations, the things put together by the modern Gorgias, Gorgias, huh? Not the other one. The modern Gorgias types are telling us that you can say, well, it's repeal and replace, except if there's no replace, you can fool some of the people some of the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time. But you can't fool all the people all the time. And eventually people are going to realize when they can't go to the doctor, they're going to realize, oh, my God, I've been had. And depending on when that occurs, that may awaken a sleeping giant, the American people, and fill them with a terrible resolve, as Yamamoto said, and then was confirmed that it was correct. 47% say only some of Obamacare should be repealed. 31% say don't even touch it, just leave it. A wise position given the meddling little hands of the Republican caucus. So it is popular in the sense of if you ask somebody, do you want to be able to buy insurance of some kind, of any kind, at whatever price, with whatever deductible, if you have a pre-existing condition or somebody in your family does, are you willing to go for that? Or would you rather be left out in the cold with no chance of doing anything in this sense? That's, I think it's clear. So you'll remember last year we talked a lot about the demise, the extinction of the Republican Party. It may be that this debate is going to put that back on the table. It is possible. But of course, in the meantime, we're confronted with people in tragic, life-threatening circumstances. So again, activism and struggle are the watchwords. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let me remind everybody that in these troubled times of fast-moving and sometimes they seem to be apocalyptic events. So far they really haven't been, but sometimes they seem that way. If you want to get some guidance, perspective, context, and above all, programmatic answers, what's to actually be done, we do that every day on the American System. I'm there every day with Daniela Walls, Monday through Thursday, and I would invite everybody to subscribe to that. You know some of the work I've done, you know some of the things I'm involved in, and if you want to support me, the way to do that is to go to americansystem.tv, and subscribe. And there are a couple of different ways you can do it. It is a nominal fee. I think the economy approach is you get 50 cents per program. So 50 cents, a penny a minute, or even less, because it's 60 minutes plus. 50 cents per program, and you can be up to date. And again, what to do? The answer to all this stuff is Medicare for all, paid for by the Wall Street sales tax, paid for also by other levies, right? Taxes, sure, on the super rich, but principally on banks, on Wall Street. The idea that simply rich people should pay for this. No, that's not where the money is. The money is now in the hands of Wall Street zombie banks, hedge fund hyenas, and others. So you've got to essentially face that fact. Now, the Democrats today, and this is in particular Congressman Yarmouth of Kentucky. This is Kentucky Congressman John Yarmouth, and he's the ranking member of the House Budget Committee. So he led the Democrats today in opposing this Orwellian, unbelievable monstrosity of cruelty and economic folly because there's nothing too much to say about this. Congressman Yarmouth pointed, and other speakers pointed to the fact that there is a Democratic alternative budget resolution which does not gut the funding for Obamacare. Notice, the gutting of the funding is a tax cut for the rich. What the Republicans are up to is their pattern over decades. Tax cuts for the rich. Strip the benefits from working people, the average families, working families, and give those benefits to the rich, the super rich, multinational corporations, and so on. So it is a tax cut for the rich. Some estimates $300 billion, $350 billion over the next 10 years, so $35 billion a year. Right? And there is a specific tax which does pay for part of this, which is levied on the highest income earners. So they don't like that. They don't want to pay for your health care. They don't care whether you live or die. They want their money. And this, again, after 2,000 years of Christianity, this is what we have. This is just not acceptable. According to some estimates, the average tax break that's going to come out of this, in other words, if you do gut and destroy Obamacare, what's it going to do to the tax bills of, the top wage earners? And the essential estimate was a $7 million tax cut. Okay, and this is amazing. This is what used to be called the 400. The 400, at that time it was 400 families, and I guess it still is in many ways. The 400 families, the 400 was considered high society in the 1890s, say in the 20 years before World War I. The 400. So now we got the 400. The top 400 taxpayers, according to this study, will each get a $7 million per family or per person tax cut if Obamacare is destroyed. And that will be $250 billion in tax cuts for insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and others. And remember, there's all kinds of stuff here. And again, I'm really wondering whether it's going to be possible still to go to an emergency room and say, I'm destitute, but I need to be treated. Right? Remember that not so long ago, you heard these horror stories of people who had no money, and their credit was getting checked, and they had none, and they expired while they were waiting. And I think we heard something somewhere in the Republican campaign. I heard that people shouldn't die in the streets. Was I dreaming when I heard that? I think we did hear something like that. So this is the wrong direction for social policy. Today, there were numerous appeals to the campaign promises of the president-elect. And I think it was said at least 15 times in his campaign that he would not cut Social Security and Medicare. Okay? He was always adamant that he wanted to cut Obamacare, but then that runs into this other thing about, are people really going to be expiring in the streets? And is that some kind of civilization worthy of the name? Now, the Obamacare premium increases are due principally once the bill is in place, right? Once the law is functioning as of 2012, and then functioning a year or two later. Those are due to private insurance companies. There is no way to avoid this exclusion of, as long as you're dealing with private insurance companies, there is no way to avoid this question of pre-existing conditions. You can either have an individual mandate that you have to buy insurance, which fulfills the government definition of what insurance is, because otherwise you could get some piece of paper that would pay nothing and you can call it insurance. It's got to be real insurance. Or it can be done through Medicare for all, and that can be paid for with user fees and a tax. So $100, $150 per person per month. Fine. Oh, not fine, but for the moment. And then supplement that, pay the lion's share with the Wall Street sales tax and similar taxes, right? The carried interest and so forth. So here's what Yarmouth says. And Yarmouth was there, distributing the time, leading the debate. So he says, it is truly disheartening that the Republican leadership's top priority for this new Congress is to end health coverage for millions of individuals and put insurance companies back in charge of health decisions for all Americans. There is nothing in the 2017 Senate budget resolution to create jobs, rebuild our nation's infrastructure, or address any of the economic concerns facing families across our nation. The election is over, but the Republicans are not ready to end the campaign rhetoric and govern. They have to drop this single-minded and misguided obsession with dismantling the Affordable Care Act so we can actually address the real needs and priorities of American families. So that's Yarmouth, Democratic congressman from Kentucky. Now, according to him and according to others, the alternative resolution, the one that I think has already been voted down, the Democratic Party budget resolution, which keeps Obamacare, also has other improvements. In other words, there are reasons in there that you should be for. And I've tried to track this down. It's not easy. The Democratic Party, as usual, not doing a good job of getting their actual proposals out there. There seems to be significant infrastructure funding in this alternative budget. We'll just get back to that in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio, where the pessimism of the intelligence and the optimism of the will can coexist, and where if you don't get active, you may get radioactive, or you may get left with nothing but your eyes to cry with. And I have to bring the bad news that the first step to dismantle, destroy, and demolish the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, has now been voted, approved by the House of Representatives here on Friday the 13th, 2017. It is a dark day. Darkness is going to fall here in Washington in an hour or an hour and 20 minutes or so. But darkness is already falling, and the abyss is gaping. So this is a vote 227 to 198 to begin to approve the budget resolution, which will begin the destruction of Obamacare. And again, I don't think they can destroy the banning of pre-existing conditions. I don't think they can take away the denial of caps. In other words, that there is no individual yearly or lifetime cap. I don't think they can, for example, allow insurance companies to charge women more. All those regulations, I believe the regulations remain there, but the money is now going to be gutted out. Above all, the federal money, the tax money, the subsidies, and all that. So there'll be a theoretical right to buy this insurance, but you may not be able to afford it. Now, 227, largely Republicans, 198, all the Democrats plus some Republicans. This was a party line vote, but there were 9 Republicans crossing the aisle. This is of some significance. Now, some of these people are reactionaries who say it doesn't go far enough. In other words, they want, something even more extreme, but fine. It's not how you get them. It's do you get them? So here are the ones, the 9 Republicans who voted against this budget resolution, right? And that was the issue. Justin Amash, Charlie Dent. This is a liberal Republican of the Philadelphia suburbs. Brian Fitzpatrick, the well-known maverick Walter Jones of North Carolina, I believe, John Katko, Raul Labrador, Tom MacArthur, Thomas Massey, and Tom McClintock. So no Democrat voted in favor of the Republican budget resolution, and these 9 Republicans have crossed over. Now, the demagogy of Ryan is truly breathtaking because he calls this a rescue mission. A rescue mission. I'm thinking if somebody were stranded in the Rocky Mountains and, in the snow and the cold, and along comes some guy on snowshoes or maybe a dog sled, and he says, I'm here to save you. I'm going to rescue you. And instead of taking the poor victim here indoors where it's warm and administering hot drinks and a roaring fire and all this stuff, I'm going to rescue you. I'm going to strip you of your coat. I'm going to take away your coat. And that's my rescue. Ryan is nostalgic now. He's been fighting this since 2010. He stood here and pleaded with the majority not to do it. Don't take something as personal as health care and subject it to this big government experiment. Don't do something so arrogant and so contrary to our founding principles. This is also funny because we have now, in the meantime, we have legislation from the 1790s voted for by members of the Constitutional Convention. You'll recall that ship owners had to buy some kind of medical insurance or make provision, put up money for sailors. And we have a couple of laws like this, which were actually passed under the George Washington administration, voted for by people who were parts of the Constitutional Convention, right? Founding fathers did not hesitate, but now our founding principles. What does he think our founding principles are? The John Birch Society? Oh, I know. Ryan thinks Ayn Rand was our founding principles, right? Ayn Rand, a Russian, existentialist, nihilist, and God knows what else, right? So, the experiment has failed. The law is collapsing. Yeah, why don't you get in there and provide some revenue? This is a rescue mission. Well, if rescue means strip you and leave you nothing but your eyes to cry with, I guess that's a rescue. And I'm reminded of Shakespeare that one can smile and be a villain. So now just back to this thing, right? The Yarmouth question. I think this is maybe from last year, but this is put forward by a bunch of people, Democrats, right? These were Congress people last year. Castor, Van Hollen, who's now a senator, Yarmouth, Pascrell, Ryan, McDermott, Lee, Pocan. Pocan was the alternative resolution today. Grisham, Dingell, the daughter, Norcross, and Moulton. So this, the Democratic budget, which is available, and I think this may be a little bit out of date, but it's basically it. Invest in America's transportation infrastructure. Increase budget authorities and budget outlays for Function 400. I guess that means infrastructure. Again, it would be better to make this a little bit more understandable for the average working stiff. But these billions of dollars, so 2017, said the Democrats, increased budget authority by 22, almost 23 billion and spend 5 billion more. 2018, increased budget authority by 32 billion and spend 14 or 15 billion more. 2019, 34 billion in budget authority more, spend 22 billion more. 2020, increase budget authority by 42 billion and spend 30 billion. Yes, so that's serious money. And the way you pay for this, don't stop paying tax breaks to corporations that ship jobs overseas and capital overseas. Prevent them from sheltering their profits in overseas tax havens. remove the carried interest loophole. You heard that. Remember in the campaign, we heard about the carried interest loophole, which allows hedge fund profiteers to treat their income as if it were capital gains and pay a lower rate. No more of that. Don't let hedge fund managers do that loophole, and get rid of accelerated depreciation for corporate jets. Yeah, do we really need that when people are being stripped of their health care? And other than that, don't allow corporations to deduct these exorbitant compensation packages, golden parachutes, Goldman. There are now 5 representatives, 5 veterans of Goldman Sachs in the incoming administration, starting in the White House and going to the Treasury, and you take it from there. So there it is. So that's now gone through, and therefore I say to those poor people in Kentucky that were interviewed by Vox online magazine, they're doing it. You thought they wouldn't do it. You thought that was campaign rhetoric? You thought that was just rhetorical flourishes? Well, it's not. So this is now the tragic situation. And I say to every one of you, the only thing that's going to change this is you in action. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. So there it is, the machinery to strip the American people of this right, that at least the theoretical right to getting health care and not being denied for pre-existing conditions or something else. This is now moving. Now we got to put this in historical perspective, right? Sometimes the most important part is the historical part. So let's go back to that day, right? This was January 11th, 1944. So we're talking 73 years ago, except it's now Friday the 13th, and that was January 11th. It was the State of the Union address. Roosevelt speaking to a country that was still fighting the Second World War, and believe me, it could have been lost during 44 and even into 45. It could have been lost, especially that Battle of the Bulge, right? That was a close call. So Roosevelt addresses the Congress or sends this statement up. People who are needy cannot be free. We have come, says Roosevelt, we have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and economic independence. Quote, necessitous men, I would say needy people today, necessitous men are not free men. Needy people are not free people. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. And of course, being sick or having a sick wife or a sick child or a sick parent, a senior, or others, relatives, right? Uncles, aunts, cousins. If they're sick, then you're not free. So in our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station. That means whether you're in the 99% or the 1%, race or creed. And this is it. This is bedrock Americanism. The New Deal America that persons of goodwill believe in and are willing to fight for. So here are the rights. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. And I think when he says shops, he means the factory floor, the shop floor. But other shops too. Those are jobs too. And we're getting all the, the closings, the Macy's and Kmart and Sears. Those are jobs too. What about them? How about a few phone calls to those executives telling them to back off? The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. In other words, jobs are great. What are the wages? What are you earning? Is it a living wage? This also bears on the needed 15 and beyond 15. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. Yes, if you're in the habit of eating, you need to provide for the family farm. Notice that's implied. The farmer and his family, not his stockholders. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. Does it sound like Walmart might be infringing on that? It could easily be. The right of every family to a decent home. Ben Carson, I hope you're listening. The right to a decent home. The right, now this is the business at hand. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. It is a right. Don't tell us it's not a right. The victors of the Second World War claim this as their right, and their children and their children's children. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age. It's called Social Security. Sickness, Medicare, accident and unemployment insurance. The right to a good education. That's a right too. Free college. It is a right in public institutions, in community colleges, and so forth. All of these rights, says Roosevelt, spell security. And after this war is won, all those years ago, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness, right? Not rip-off profits and looting and primitive accumulation. Human happiness and well-being. America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part on how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice for all our citizens. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world. So I think those are words to live by. So you'll have opportunity. You have an opportunity right now. The Democrats again today were coming forward with all kinds of, real people, first-person accounts of what it's like to once again face this thing where if you lose your job and you lose your health care with your job, then can you get insurance if you've got some kind of pre-existing condition? And pre-existing condition can be the most petty, the most picayune, the smallest. I mean, things that you wouldn't even consider a disease can be cited as pre-existing condition. All right. So that and the Republicans, this was funny. At a certain point in this debate, the Republican floor manager came in, and I'm wondering who this was. It was, as I said, it was Yarmouth for the Democrats. Pocan gave his name to this resolution. Oh, let me tell you the Pocan resolution. The Pocan resolution was voted down, but it said the sense of the House of Representatives is that there should be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Okay, that's the Pocan resolution. Because, as many pointed out, this budget resolution opens the gates of hell. It opens the gates of hell. I think in the Taoist religion, it's Yen Lo Wang who presides over the underworld, right? And in August Ghost Month, he opens the gates of hell, and all the evil spirits can come and haunt you here on earth. Well, the Republicans have opened the gates of hell, right, with floor leader Yen Lo Wang, Prince of the Underworld, or Pluto, or whoever it is. Social Security can be privatized. Medicare can be privatized and looted. And Medicaid, of course, is already targeted along with Obamacare, because in many ways these overlap. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Okay, our time is dwindling. The shadows are lengthening on the walls of the great public buildings here in Washington. Darkness is falling, and we're seeing the lights go out in America, and will they be re-illumined in the course of our generation? And we don't know. That's a version of Sir Edward Grey in August of 1914. But this is a very grim situation. And again, one of the great ironies is that people who call themselves Christian evangelicals have brought this upon us. Is there charity? St. Paul says faith, hope, and charity. We did a whole lot of discussion over the Christmas holidays about charity, about the view in the Bible of St. Paul, about Dickens, and about others. Charity. Without that, there's no Christianity. So I would appeal to people. Can this really be your intent? Is this really what you want? To strip these people and leave them with nothing but their eyes to cry with? And again, it's not these people, it's you too. Whatever is done will be done to many who have no clue right now of how bad that is, right? We had this one guy come forward in the Ryan town hall last night, and he said, I'm a Republican. I was so ideological. I essentially said that I will close my business. I will never be part of Obamacare, until he was told you have 6 weeks to live, and there's otherwise, though we can save you, there's a treatment which is quite reliable, and it's going to cost you something. And at that point, the guy said, thank God for Obamacare. Now, Ryan, what are you offering me? And Ryan, of course, in his cynicism, smiled and said, of course, we're going to provide something. It's going to be great. It's going to be something terrific, I guess, was the version that we heard. The Republicans can't do it. They have had 6 to 7 years or 8 years to fix this, to provide a concrete, viable alternative. They have nothing of the kind. They cannot agree. And even if a lot of them did agree, they would need the support of the Democrats, and they would be, because of their ideology, unwilling to make any compromises. For example, revenue enhancement, right? Taxes, some of that stuff about the hedge fund hyenas getting the carried interest kickback, right? That has got to be gotten rid of. Now, the story on the various the Trump cabinet nominees, we've covered that during the week. So all I can say is we don't have time to do all these things here on Friday afternoon. So please subscribe. Go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. Subscribe and you can hear it all, right? What we think about Mattis, what we think about Tillerson, what we think about Ben Carson, what we think about Pompeo, what we think about Kelly. One interesting note, what you see what's the pattern that's emerging is that the military people seem to be more realistic. Certainly Mattis, more realistic than many, actually more realistic than many Democrats, at least on some things. He's willing to accept the Iran nuclear accord. Pompeo says there will be no torture by the CIA. I regard Pompeo as a kind of half military, right? This was the guy who was he was the commander of a tank battalion in Germany at the end of the Cold War, so he's got some element there. And then, of course, General Kelly, who says that he doesn't think a wall makes any sense. A wall really won't help you. So what we've got is a situation where the Democratic candidate is out of touch, elitist, multicultural to the point of really leaving out a lot of people. Identity politics, okay, that failed. Now you've got the civilian government of the Republican Party. That comes in. Looks like some chaos is already at hand after today. Health system descending into chaos, provoking a recession that you never needed. Well, if the Democrats are incompetent and bungling and feckless, and the Republicans are going to show you that they do on the whole rather worse, then what's left? Well, then there's the military, and that doesn't have to be bad. On the other hand, you have to look at it case by case. And I mean, Ulysses Grant ran for president. Good president. Excellent in many ways. And yeah, there was corruption, but that's the way of the world. Eisenhower, not the worst by any measure. Many positive features. So you have all of that you've got to bear in mind. Now, the one problem, though, was General Mattis, and this is something serious, that there is this law. It's called the National Security Act of 1947, and it says if you want to be Secretary of Defense or in the cabinet, you've got to be out of the military. You've got to be off active duty, resign commission, get your discharge for 7 years. And with Mattis, it's only 4 years. So the question was, would there be a waiver? The Senate committee, led by McCain, pushed through a waiver real fast. That went over to the House. So then there was the so-called markup, right? The hearing in the House Armed Services Committee. And they said, Mattis, come over and reassure us. And he said, fine, I'm coming. And then he was told, apparently by the transition team, we are told, that he was not allowed to go over to the House. And he did not go to the House. And I think the House has already, now this afternoon, I believe the House has passed. I'm not sure. They are on the way to passing anyway, this waiver. Except it's not a waiver. The way McCain wrote this, the 7-year provision is gone. It won't be there for anybody. The Congress in 1950, during the Korean War, when Truman had to replace Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson with a military man, George Marshall, right, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army in World War II, had been Secretary of Defense, had been Secretary of State, Marshall Plan, then became Secretary of Defense. This was done by name. It said, we're making an exception to this law that George C. Marshall can become Secretary of Defense, replacing Johnson, but don't do this again, and this is only a one-time thing. The bill that has now apparently gone through, or soon will, says the 7-year requirement is gone, and I don't even think it replaces it with a 4-year or a 2-year or anything. So this opens the door rather too widely, and I think the Democratic floor manager on this one also had some germane points to make in the debate today on C-SPAN. Pocan, as I said, Pocan wanted to guarantee no cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. That was voted down. The support for the Republican position that they adduced was the National Association of Manufacturers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I think various organizations. One or two of them sounded like these Grover Norquist organizations. So is that your base? Is that what you're really going with? I certainly hope not. All right. There we go. We've talked during the week. We talked about the conflict of interest question. There are 5 points that you've got to satisfy. It's got to be a trust. It's got to be a blind trust. It's got to be under a trustee. There's got to be an ethics wall, and you've got to respect the emoluments clause. And that is not what is happening. So back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Now, we're headed for the inauguration. The inauguration is a week from today. You know, it's important to make your voice heard. And then there will be the Women's March on Washington the day after that. So we went through a rundown of a number of these events that are being held around town and all over the place. So once again, you've got to find a way, in particular in regard to Congress, in particular in regard to the Senate and the House, you have got to make your voice heard. And I urge you to do it. And don't be shy and be very blunt. They actually appreciate it. They want to know, what is it you want? What can I do for you? Make sure we preserve the guts of Obamacare. And if you don't want to do that, then it's got to be Medicare for all. Now, when we see some of this stuff, right, when we see the cynicism, we are impressed once again with the fact that this is going to be the age. It's already the age of oligarchy. It's going to be the age of nihilism. And nihilism is essentially people who don't believe in anything. They claim to believe in God. They don't seem to. They claim to believe, once again, in Christianity, but the main tenets seem to go by the boards, right? Charity, agape, and so forth. No, not respected. Nihilism. And when nihilism goes on the offensive, we have this phenomenon known as gaslighting. And gaslighting is the Orwellian, Kafkaesque work of a militant nihilist who wants to convince you that you should be a nihilist too, or to turn you into a nihilist willy-nilly, whatever you want. Forget what you want. The nihilist forces, the nihilist movement wants to recruit you by so shaking your belief in bedrock reality that you lose touch, right there. Truth, facts, reality, morality, these things, they say, no, that's old hat, right? That's quaint. That's quaint. And we heard one version of that from the neocons 10 years ago, right? That essentially the view hasn't changed, right? The nihilist, to the extent that he believes in anything, is a disciple of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And the difference is that essentially that Nietzsche is a kind of a more aggressive, militant version of Schopenhauer, but that, you know the drill. God is dead. Morality is dead. Alles ist erlaubt. All kinds of things are allowed. There's no morality there. It's an antinomian world. But when it gets to gaslighting, they're trying to tell you, I never said that, or, where did you get that? And, simply shifting the ground. It comes from this really chilling 1940s movement with Charles Boyer. Remember Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman. And Charles Boyer wants to drive his wife crazy. And he does this by tampering, meddling, arranging, rearranging the little details of everyday life so as to create in her mind the sense that she's going crazy. And the idea then is that she's going crazy, and then he's going to take over and get everything that he wants. That's gaslight. So gaslighting, gaslightism. So when nihilism comes after you, it's in that form, and then therefore everything like fake news and the conspiracy theorists, as I've always pointed out, I get flack for this myself, but I'm a historian. I'm based on facts, and I don't go looking for conspiracies. I go looking for what actually happened. As Leopold von Ranke, the great German historian of the early 19th century, not perfect, right? A romantic, lots of problems. But he said what we have to try to do is to recreate how it actually was, what actually happened, right? So that's fundamental. And if you give that up, if you just say, well, let's concoct a cheap, instant conspiracy theory, then you're going into the wilderness. And you could see it already. One of the lasting pieces of damage from 9/11 was that people began to think that everything was a conspiracy. Well, it's not. The American Civil War was a conspiracy, but once it got going, it was no longer a conspiracy. And similarly, right, there is reality. It's called economic reality. There's political reality. There's military reality. There's technical, scientific reality. There are all kinds of rock-hard realities, and you have got to deal with them. And when I say realities, I mean those are aspects and components of one thing which we can call reality itself. It's not plural. There's one. It's unified. It's not fragmented metaphysically. It's fragmented in the way you see it. But ultimately, it's all part of the same process of world reality, world history, I guess is the best way to put it. So there we are. Now I have to point out also that we've gone through this question of Russia. Nothing special to add to this, just maybe to summarize. If you look at some of these documents that have come out, right, some of the dodgier documents that have come out this week, you get the idea of Russia as a government that is not unanimous about whether it makes sense to meddle and interfere in U.S. elections. And I thought it was interesting that Ambassador Kislyak, who's the current Russian ambassador here in Washington, and his predecessor, Ambassador Ushakov, they both said, don't do this. It's not worth it. It's too dangerous. It's risky. These are experienced diplomats. These are competent ambassadors who have, I think, a sense of reality, if nothing else. And it doesn't mean that they're softies, right? Ushakov in particular is considered to be quite a hardliner. The one that you have to watch out for, in my view, is the one that seems to be gradually, provisionally emerging as the guy who wanted this or carried it out. Dmitri Peskov. And Dmitri Peskov sits in the Kremlin. He's the number 2 of the presidential administration. He's the spokesperson. He's like the White House press secretary. And he was interviewed very briefly. I saw a brief piece of it, and I haven't been able to find the rest. And he's asked by a pretty well-known network correspondent from here, what about this stuff, right? Did you hack? Did you have these files? And he said, I've never seen a file. And the guy interviewing has had the presence of mind to say, that's not a denial. And Peskov says, yeah, well, he gets out of it some other way. So we're told that Ivanov, the head of the presidential administration, sort of White House chief of staff equivalent, he did nothing to stop this. Ivanov apparently let it happen, but then when it began to get out of control, he tried to scapegoat Peskov, but Peskov sort of was up to his neck in this thing. The other person interesting to look at is Medvedev, and Medvedev didn't like any of this. He was appalled. He said, we need good relations with the United States, and apparently he would like to be able to continue to visit over here. So don't fall prey to this demonization of Russia, right? During the week we went through, the Russian position on Syria has a lot to be said